I'm Dr. Kelly Brogan. You may know me as a New York Times bestselling author of a book with an exploding pill on the cover, renegade psychiatrist, pole dancer, or honorary member of the Disinformation Dozen. What can I say? I'm a born provocateur. I've spent most of my recent life exposing deceptions, connecting dots, and discovering the secret places my inner victim is still waiting to be liberated. And now I feel called to help you reclaim all of your parts, your health, your sexuality, your power, and your expression, so that you can finally truly own yourself. I want to ignite in you that inner knowing and the pulsing vitality that lives beneath your disempowerment, disconnection, and resentment, so that you can audaciously, courageously, and playfully alchemize your struggle into the specific pleasure of who you are. This is Reclamation Radio. Hi, and welcome back to Reclamation Radio. I am giddy to be here with Ryan Schwartz. We're just exploring the 10,000 tendrils that have brought us into each other's spheres over the years. And we are actually meeting for the first time live right now. So I am mostly interested in focusing on a new book that he has put out and this extraordinarily essential subject matter. However, there are many, many things that we could be focusing on. He is probably most known for his copywriting mastery and has been dubbed by, I don't know, like 10 different people that I know in the field as like the resource when it comes to copywriting, which, you know, if you're in the digital entrepreneurial space, that is quite an accolade to secure. So we will not be chatting about that today so much because a book that he put out under, what would it be? Like a pen name?
Yeah, let's call it a pen name. I call it a signature.
A pseudonym?
Yeah.
And he has consented to reveal his identity in this interview called Shadow Money. Found its way onto my desk recently, and it was in the perfect timing because I have just probably in the past, 6 months or so, considered the possibility that I have something to say about the subject myself. And, you know, there are a few topics. I was just talking to my friend Tom Cowan about this because he was like, you know, let's talk about our money situations, right? Like nobody ever talks about that. Like there are so many other taboo topics, and taboo topics are pretty much my bread and butter, that feel more accessible than this. And part of it, the block for me was like, I felt that there was some sort of legitimacy that I had to have under my belt before I could speak to the relationship that we all have with this green permission slip, you know, or pixelated digital permission slip that we call money. And so recently I taught a masterclass on the subject called Audacious Entrepreneurship. And what I like to talk about is exactly what this book is about, which is the psychospiritual dimensions of this. Of course, you're a strategy guy, right? So you could have spoken to us about how to strategize around scaling and expanding into greater and greater abundance. But what you have been focused on and penned in this text is really about right relationship, you know, if I could summarize, with this so-called thing. You say that, first of all, hi.
Yeah. Hey, good to meet you. 7 years later.
Oh my God, right? I'm a little excited. So you say, Ryan, that money's desire is to be healed
right.
and liberated through relationship with its stewards, which I absolutely resonate with. And so I thought, you know, there's a lot of different perspectives on what money is. And you and I don't know if I'm like exposing you here, but you and I traffic a bit in the conspiratorial realms. At least you have some passing familiarity with some of the things that I am up to. And you and I probably have been exposed to people who question the entire system, look at currency as, you know, fiat that is unbacked. Sure. And what are we doing here? And it's all just a slippery slide to the digital social currency prison that we are on the way to. So why would we ever be incentivized to develop a conscious relationship with money? Isn't it itself
Right.
the problem? So I'd love to sort of start out with where you've come to about like, what is it? What is it in your conceptualization? And then, we can go from there, because a lot of the relational stuff that you talk about in this book, I think is really where, the
Yeah.
rubber meets the road.
Well, there are countless conceptualizations, right? And we could have this conversation with 50 different people, get 50 different concepts. Maybe some of them will be loosely related. But ultimately, each conceptualization creates its own type of thought form, right? Or morphogenetic field, right? And none of them are precisely it, right? And none of them are precisely a clean, non-distorted view or experience. So in my book and in my direct experience, I was really careful to make a distinction between money, right, as a higher self, as a collective consciousness that is, right, in its pristine cleanliness, right, and these individuated bundles of money consciousness that have been encoded with different paradigms and different systems and different imprints based on the systems that they have partaken in, right? And where I got a really clear message, right, was that money as a consciousness was just like sick and tired of being lumped in with the oppressive systems that it itself has been abused in, right? And how there's this wholesale denial and rejection of money when money is like, wait a second, right? Like I've been tormented and abused and encoded within these same systems, and rejecting me isn't the solution to being empowered, right? So to me, there's a co-ascension, right, between, human empowerment, right, and the empowerment of money consciousness and the means that it provides, right, within that journey. So, yeah, what is money, right? It's been a question that I've heard asked so many times, right, and there's so many different answers. I love the way you phrase it as a permission slip, right? I think that what it represents and what it enables and empowers is a permission slip, very much to live, right? We are interacting with money right now. The table that my hands are on, this computer, this conversation is empowered by money, where it's an inseparable force. And why would we want to create further distance from something that is life-giving in its cleanest, most purest form? So I like the definition of means, money as means, means for our message, means for our well-being, means for our relational health, means for our personal health and our sovereignty. And I love orienting around it as a consciousness that desires and requires to some degree our participation in its healing, right? I love that sense of responsibility and protectorship, right, towards this energy of money, of stewardship towards it, of containment towards it, instead of being lazy and rejecting of it. One part of my journey was I was for years so loose and neglectful, right? I'd have money lying in this account and in this account, and I didn't want to be bothered to steward it, right? I'm like, that's not my responsibility, right? It's kind of like, I don't really love the management of money. I don't really love, recirculating it into all these different assets or these vehicles. It just didn't appeal to me. And I had this realization really kind of over the last year. It's like how absent that stewardship and that containment is, right? If money is a feminine force, right, how much does it require that directionality, right? That feeling of safety, that feeling of you can exist within this container, right, where you can flourish and do your thing, right? So I love the sense of responsibility that's been adopted with the message that's come through.
I love this. I mean, I just recorded a podcast called Feminine Homecoming. And what I spoke about is all of exactly what you're saying, like all of these feminine energies that want to come home, right? Water. I mean, I just had Veda Austin on the podcast. There's so many of us recognizing the inherent intelligence of water, whether it's, the natural world, whether it's these forces related to childbirth. There's so many feminine homecomings, and it is that stewardship. It's that containment. I love using that word myself. And I think that when I feel into why people might have resistance to this conversation, especially in my audience where there is a lot of concern about the status quo and being complicit with that which you are fundamentally uninterested in consenting to. I can feel like when you say, well, it's a permission slip. There is a system that allows you to have things, and it is a means. And then what if you don't want to support such a system, and you think that land should be, habitable without these green permission slips, and you think that we should be able to participate in barter and engage in sacred economics? Then you have all these beautiful concepts bubbling up in your heart, and participating in money and looking at it and counting it and budgeting it and having a relationship with it rather than the benign neglect you're talking about just feels like a betrayal almost of your fantasy, your vision, your hope for the future. And totally, like, I get that totally, if anyone is feeling that. And there's a bit of what I call like eggs from the hardware store, right? Like, if you're insisting that it be different, this is how it is right now. This is how it is right now, right? We cannot live on land without, participating in the fiat currency system. So this is how it is right now. And if you're insisting that it be different, you're insisting that they sell eggs where they don't, right? And so part of what I'm hearing from you is that there's an opportunity to reframe as a more complex, like a mixed object, as they would say in psychology, right? Like, rather than the childlike projections, and you talk a lot about projection in this book, of the, the bad thing out there that you still have a relationship with. It's like breaking up with your boyfriend, but he's still living on the couch. So what are you going to do about it?
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a cleanup phase to be had, right? And our idealism tends to outpace the speed in which we can clean up and purify and re-encode these systems, right? So like one thing I dive into in the book, and I had another really rich conversation about it over the weekend with a dear friend, was like, if the banking systems collapse tomorrow, right? If the whole fiat system crumbled tomorrow, right? And we went into a barter system, right? Would there be more harmony or more chaos, right? Would there be more destruction or would there be more collaborative natures, right? Has human consciousness on a wide enough scale evolved to the point where we can actually be productive and flourish within these systems of sacred economics, for example? My sense, right, is that there'd be more devastation in the short term, right? And that there's still a cleanup job to be had internally, right? And really kind of addressing what would we do, right? Like, what are the dormant shadow patterns still available within our expression, right? That haven't necessarily been enabled or empowered, right? But is there a part of me, is there a fragment within me that gets off, right, in controlling someone else through financial means, right? Is there a part of me that longs for that, like, fuck you to everyone once I have enough wealth, right? Is there a part of me that even abuses and tries to control and manipulate others through money, right? And until I am all but certain, right, that I have cleaned up those parts, that I have brought those parts back into wholeness, holding on to this idealism before I'm even ready to cleanly participate in it feels like a bit of a leap.
Totally. I have experienced this, and I'm sure you have too, just even with intentional community, right? Like, so since 2020, there's so many that are cropping up, and I have that longing, yearning within me, to I live in an HOA now, believe it or not. And I say believe it or not because I am not somebody who participates well, easily, or readily in these kinds of structures, but I do. And, I wouldn't say I'm particularly friendly with any of the, whatever. So we're superficially neighbors. And if these were my best friends, right, or you all, it would be so delicious a life. And so this longing that we have for community, I think you probably know folks who have tried it, and it ain't the thing, right? It's not really in lived experience what people often hope and imagine it to be, because my assertion is that it's probably the same as yours. We're not ready. Like, we're not ready. There's still more for us to work within the here and now, in what's available, in this, dumpster fire that is our like current economic system,
Mm-hmm.
so that we can get to know ourselves better. And
Right.
if self-discovery is the imperative, then we still have opportunity here that you're suggesting we mine. So I have a couple of quotes I want to share, if that's cool. And one is, I just thought was great. So this is germane to what we're talking about. So you talk about this shift, that we're in the midst of, and why we may have this opportunity that you and I are referencing. So you say, prior to 100 years ago, the wealthiest people in the world were almost exclusively monarchs, oppressive tycoons, tyrants, slavers, and warmongers. It would be nearly impossible to penetrate the upper echelons of global wealth in a single lifetime. Today, the 1,000 richest people in the world include artists, athletes, entertainers, innovators, inventors, entrepreneurs, and fashion designers. It must be noted how unprecedented and massive this shift is. The speed in which massive wealth is transferred is also unprecedented. So what I hear when I read that is, it's almost like the choice paralysis phenomenon, right? It's like the burden of opportunity and this sense that we all have that we can jump classes, that we can play in places and fields that we are not supposed to, with our programming, right? So if I grew up, how do we want to call it? Lower socioeconomic class, underprivileged, whatever the PC term is, right? If I grew up that way and then I, become a multimillionaire, I am going to be living with the programs that I don't belong in this multimillionaire class. And here I am. So how might I, manifest subconsciously or semi-consciously the conditions for my, affirming that sense. I don't belong here, right? Like, look, here I am. I have all the same things as all these people, and yet I still don't feel like I fit in. I still feel like the black sheep. So I see this a lot as, I work with female entrepreneurs and as in my own experience, and I haven't ever thought about it that way, that we are in this, this unprecedented opening of potential.
Yeah, there's such an audacious element to that I love tying in that word. And why I call it audacious, right, is making that leap feels bold. And to many who don't make that leap, and many actually who do and end up kind of stuck with a sense of financial survivor's guilt, right, is like that I don't belong there isn't only their worthiness, right? It's a sense that they have somehow betrayed their parents, right? Or betrayed past friends or past lovers even, right? People who just couldn't and can't and won't and refuse to see them at that level of success because it feels like too much of an attack of who they were and how they live their lives, right? We talk about generational curses. They're not esoteric things, right? It's like, how do you feel your mother, right, or your sister or your brother or your past lover would feel about your success now? And if you feel like they can't witness you in that, right, they just don't want to see you at that level of success because it triggers too much in them, and you haven't yet created that sense of separation and that audacity to make that claim cleanly, right? Not just like the fuck you, I'm doing my thing, right? While bypassing the elements or the strands of guilt that have you hooked into that. But within that audacious claim is a lot of inner work and a lot of inner healing. And I've always loved how, not all the time, but in many cases, and for whatever reason it appears in my field more with female entrepreneurs, how much healing happens within that ascent towards wealth, right? It's just a beautiful phenomenon to witness, right? How much gets cleaned up, how much gets owned as one ascends and moves up that financial scale.
I just got off a call actually with a bunch of female entrepreneurs in a container, and one of the gals was talking about how she feels inhibited in her marketing because her mom has expressed disappointment in her and her interests, sort of like a Christian rather, like meets the esoteric kind of a riff, I guess, in terms of their value systems.
Mm-hmm.
And the, mother wound, if you will, like as we consider it, often suggests or requires that as a woman, you stay small, you attenuate, right? So that you can remain in connection through commiseration, typically like with your mama. And what's funny is that here we are very much in, if you want to talk polarity, very much in a masculine comportment as women, as doms, as entrepreneurs in this space. And what we are ultimately here to alchemize in many ways is that capacity to be seen in our audacity, right? Like the capacity to be seen as big, as bold, as self-expressed, which is all, feminine maturation. So we're also in this moment, right? As women, since you were saying you work with a lot of them, where we have the opportunity through our relationship to business and entrepreneurship to heal like lineage level stuff, right? And yeah, it's not for the faint of heart. So you talk a lot about this collective shadow projections that we engage when it comes to money. And I do think that confers a lot of safety to many of us to imagine that people who have money or are whatever, sort of echelon of wealth that is beyond your own are fill in the blank, right? Like are to be derided for whatever reason. Like they are shallow, they're disconnected, they don't care, they're selfish, they're, materialist, whatever it is. How do you feel like, if you could generalize, that our sort of like unconscious shadow projections, right? Because those are conscious, like it's like money is the root of all evil stuff, like that's sort of in the field. But what about the sort of like the shadow projections that are less known to us and how they might impact us, right? Like what struggles have you seen even in your work supporting business owners? Like what struggles have you seen that you say, oh, okay, like that person's got that kind of money stuff going on?
Yeah, so certainly hitting wealth ceilings, right, has a lot to do with a fear of who you'll become and how life will reorient at that stage, right? And kind of this, we'll call it a less than conscious fear, right? That expression or what gets expressed there isn't necessarily going to be optimal, right, or effective. And it may destroy a family or destroy your life or have you hated or get rejected or all sorts of things, right? On the masculine side, or on the side of like male entrepreneurs, one pattern has been really fascinating. And that has been that of financial punishment. The control mechanism, the desire to withhold money, right, and withhold the sense of safety that money provides, right, has often been utilized or weaponized against partners and wives as a for lack of a better word, kind of like a get back at you strategy for withholding sexuality, right? Or for what they perceive to be withholding sexuality. So it's like, I'm not getting the intimacy I deserve here, right? And there's such a harsh entitlement there when I hear the languaging, right, that I deserve. And it's like, well, why do you deserve that, right? Like, and so much comes out of that, right? But like this subtle line of punishment of not wanting to even attract wealth, right, or get to the next level of their business because of the sting and upset that comes in having to share that, right? They almost don't want their partners to be the beneficiary of a success that they feel had nothing to do with them. And to me, that's like the most widespread and devastating one I've seen on the male entrepreneurship side, because these aren't quote unquote bad people, right? These aren't people that you would like see on the surface and be like, ooh, he has that, right? These are the stuff that comes out through deeper inquiry, right? And like, why are you afraid, right, of generating $1 million in your business this year? Like, what does life look like at that stage? And one exercise anyone could go through, right, is like, choose that number that represents your next stage of wealth that is available to you, right? Like, call it $500,000, $1 million, $10 million, doesn't really matter, right? And you can envision that field of money, right? Kind of coming closer and closer and closer to your body, and notice at what stage of proximity tension arises, right? Notice where within your field that wall goes up, right? That contraction. Then like tune into that contraction. What voices are present within it? What is the story within it? What are the rejections within it? Because there are many quote unquote good reasons to reject wealth, right? There are many shadows that may get activated when in the presence of such an amplifying force, in the presence of means, right? It gives these shadow aspects, these unhealed fragments, the means to animate. And that animation could be quite destructive, right? And there could be very good reason to kind of shield yourself off from it. And that's kind of where wealth ceilings come into play.
Totally. I mean, I relate to this probably again because of that sort of the cross-pollination of the polarities in the entrepreneurial space. Like even there have been times as I've done shadow work on my relationship with money, where in my business structure, so when 2020 came, I stepped down. I decided, okay, if I'm going to judge all the totalitarians and authoritarians in the world, then where am I, holding that energy in my own life? So I stopped telling my girls to clean their room or like eat a bite of broccoli. And I actually stepped down as CEO. And I decided I was going to do only like a rev share partnership model and see how that felt instead. Right. So we're all in it together, folks. Like I'm not on high, and there were benefits to that and challenges to that for sure. And I remember wondering, subconsciously, would I be attracting less revenue because I'm sharing it now, right? So like, like, is that possible that a program that says, if I have something that somebody else doesn't have, I have to give it even if I don't want to, right? So this idea, I think, especially for, little girls, that says, you must give what you don't want to give.
Right.
And even though that's irrational and these are agreements and contracts, and you could be talking about, a male client who's married and of course he loves this woman, like why would he not want to provide for her? That doesn't make any sense. But we're talking about programs, and that's where you can see that money is about, these realms of consciousness that want to be exposed to the light of awareness. And it's so much deeper than just what it appears.
And what comes up for me is just to acknowledge, right, how much grace there actually is in that process. Like one story that comes to mind, I think you shared it on one of your videos, right, was how you had like a year or set of like 7 or 8 months when you were really down on your business. And then you actually looked at your numbers, right? And it was like a phenomenal year, right? In September,
the story I told myself was that, so I just left my marriage, and I have never been like a single woman since I've been, employed. I mean, I started working at a bagel store when I was 10. So how do I want to say this? In my adult life, I have never been single. Okay. While I've been working like in this field and with this business. And so I had that program arise that said, you can't do this without a man next to you. Whatever, why? I don't know. Whatever reasoning, maybe I need his gaze, like maybe I need his support, maybe I need his affirmation, maybe I need his attention, like whatever it is, I encounter that. And so literally it was 9 months of the year that I told myself like the business is failing. Now I have a fetish around that. Like I like to feel it's going wrong and negativistically focus. I've done a lot of work on that in the past year and a half, I would say. But I have been, right, because that's a havingness capacity. That's like a practice of celebration. That is, it's safe to be big in the ways that we were just saying. So before I had done that work, I was very and I didn't mention, but your partner, we worked together before your little came into the picture, and Suzanne, she witnessed so much probably of this pattern in me where I would always focus on, it's not good enough. It's not enough. The launch didn't go the way. Why aren't 12 million people, reclaiming their health? Why is it only 2,000 or whatever? And so I was in this classic fetishized place where I was complaining about how things were going for 9 months and convinced that I was literally going to have to like shut down the operation
Mm.
And then I had an audit done, and I had already
Yeah.
a 7-figure year. So it's extraordinary, the stories that we can tell ourselves and then experience a
Mhm.
life predicated by those stories.
Right. To me, that's just amazing and worth acknowledging, right? Just like how you could spend such a good chunk of time and energy, right, in these stories, in these programs that any kind of manifestation circle would tell you, that's keeping you broke, right? And yet there is still this thread of mystery, right, or of grace that is providing, right? And it's like you don't have to be perfect. I think that there's this obsession around getting through all your shadows so quickly and right away because the relationship can't survive. Your relationship with money can't survive and be abundant until or unless. And that level of pressure and urgency to get through it all right away because that thing won't survive is such an unnecessary pressure, right? And whose voice is that? Like, where is that story generated from? I just love that example, right? Of how like you can have an incredibly abundant year while still spinning in all of these non-ideal stories, right? And like you're not manifesting disaster, even if you're kind of ruminating around those ideas. And just this idea of this like inbuilt grace and inbuilt support or a greater part of you that is still attracting and calling in beautiful support, right, is incredible. And I think worth noting for those who feel such immense pressure of perfection in the energy they're experiencing, right, in the stories they're telling themselves.
Totally.
Yeah.
So when we think of money, we obviously think of transactions, right? So we're talking about exchanges and we're talking about agreements and sometimes contracts. And there is this idea we've already touched on of giving what is unwillingly given, and how these kinds of programs and traumas really can be triggered and activated in the space of money. And you wrote about something I had also been exploring, which is this belief that many of us have that receiving money means trading or exchanging like your life.
Right.
And I had, this masterclass that I mentioned, somebody on the socials wrote this thing I'm going to read to me, to little old me. So mean. No, somebody wrote, okay. This person, I think is a woman. I cringed at that. So I'm promoting this masterclass, right? And this is what she writes. I cringed at that exact part too. Basically, she's admitting that she unethically makes an obscene amount of money for almost no work at all and sits there priding herself on it. Yet there are people who work 60 plus hours a week and can't even afford groceries. How people can sit with themselves and spiritually manipulate it into self-love and self-care is so backwards. We've become so beyond disconnected from humanity and what it really means to care for each other. I certainly would agree with that last statement. And I thought, wow, that is fascinating to me because I have that belief too. And just that day, I had shared a little story that I was like at a Pilates class. I've like started doing Pilates. I'm like that bitch now. I was at a class and this woman came up to me and she's like, I love your hair. Your curls are so pretty. And I look at her and I say, thank you. It's so much work. Okay. So I received her compliment. And even though I know better, I ain't doing better yet. So even though I know better, that thank you period is a complete sentence, I felt compelled to translate to her that I'm working for what it is that she likes that I have. Right. And so I had just had that experience. And, here I am reflected the same sentiment that if you're working for it really hard and you're exchanging, as you put it, your life force, right? You're exchanging your life, then it's okay if you have it. But if you woke up that way, with all of it, just trickling into your life, then you actually deserve, to be marginalized and maybe even punished.
Right.
So I'd love for you to speak to your experience and perspective, because I think this is big for us, this
That's a
relationship,
huge topic.
toil and trouble and prosperity.
Yeah. Most people's set point that I've encountered, right, is this it's more than an idea or more than a belief. It's a lived experience, right? It's how they've been encoded to receive money, is they feel most comfortable, right, giving more life and energy than what they receive back, right? That is the only type of transaction where they feel fully safe in, right? If they have not given more life force than what they've received, so much stuff gets triggered, right? The judgment of others, for one, right? You look at that, comment that you just read out loud, right? That is a legitimate fear of backlash, right? Of receiving for not giving more life force in exchange. So one exercise, right? It's in the book. I call it, I think, money reality distortion fields, right? Is the way we receive money has been encoded, right? A certain way of acceptability, right? It's acceptable to receive at a certain speed. It's acceptable to receive under a certain set of conditions. And that's a really important one I want people to kind of hone in on, is what are the conditions you have determined to be the ones that money flows to you, right? And how true are they? And where are they rooted in? For many, just even tracing back to your primary wound of the first time you received significant money, right? Like that first job you had, usually will set the set point. Most people's first job, they gave a lot more life to receive very little, right? Many people I've worked with have experienced legitimate harassment, right? Of like, I receive money when I tolerate these gazes and these stares, right? And these comments, right? And there's this element of even self-betrayal in receiving, right? Where that is what is encoded in quote unquote the circumstances in which you can receive money. So to me, that's a huge topic, is re-encoding what conditions are acceptable and even favorable and even enjoyable to receive money. Move from acceptable to enjoyable. What would be the most enjoyable conditions to receive money in? And it's not in this book, but it's in book number 2. So one of my annoying, frustrating things as a writer is I tend to download things in 3-part series, and then I have to write for the whole year. But the second book is called Love Money. And one of the topics that kind of flowed in was this idea of 4 prosperous zones. Don't hate me, I downloaded the term. It's a little weird, but also a little cool.
Wait, what?
4
That is
prosperous
so
zones, right?
good. That
And
is
most
so
people are only used to receiving through quote unquote value exchange, giving for something that's your product, your service, your business, your wage, right? And we could go all into the paradigm of quote unquote wage and how unnatural that is, right? And how that is kind of an imprint that's been only recently kind of like really cemented in our consciousness of how we receive. But value exchange is only one of those zones we could get comfortable receiving, right? A gift, whether it's inheritance or some human, some stranger, right? Just like blessing you with a gift, right? How do you feel? How do most people feel in receiving a gift? At what point does the body contract? At what point is the gift too big and too much and too unsafe, right? How can we create openness and appreciation and even that erotic flow of energy, right? With that gift that comes in. So there's gift, whether that's inheritance, whether that's a stranger, whether that's whatever, right? There's the gift element. There's value exchange. There's ROI, right? Your investments like growing in value, right? That is quote unquote money for nothing. That is money being contained and stewarded and growing on its own accord. And how do you feel in receiving that, right? Do you feel good, right? And watching an investment 2x, 5x, 10x over, 20 years, or does that feel like, like I don't deserve that because most of the world doesn't even have that opportunity? So looking at these different ways of receiving wealth, luck and fortune is the 4th one. And this is such a big one, right? It's like how many people, I'd say most people, almost don't want to be fortunate, right? And it's so odd to say out loud. It's like you want to be fortunate, there's a desire for it, and you don't want people to know you got lucky, right? You've heard terms of that lucky bitch, right? You have a horseshoe up your ass. All these words we encode in our languaging. It's like, no, I don't want to be that, right? Like, I just don't want all those I don't want all those like cursing glances, right? People subtly cursing my good fortune, right? Because I know the other shoe will drop and it'll be so harsh and so rude and such a rough experience after that fortune, right? So it's like looking at these 4 different areas and cleaning that up, right? What is your level of receptivity and openness and enjoyment? I really like the word enjoyment in this case, because accepting is kind of like, it's neutral. It's like, yeah, I could do it, right? And it's like, I don't think money wants to arrive, right, to the, yeah, I'm okay with you here, right? I don't think fortune is like seeking somebody who's like, you know, I can warm myself up to the idea, right? It's like, if these energy flows desire to be received ecstatically, right, and be liberated through how one receives them, like how much can we avail ourselves to that enjoyment? And there's so much re-encoding to be done. And once again, it's not this process where every fragment needs to be cleaned, every bit of charge needs to be discharged before you can be in such a healthy and harmonious state of receiving, right? The rewards are ongoing and cumulative as you go. So yeah, a lot of practices to be had there.
Yeah. And if we keep the relational intention alive, in this discussion, you can translate all of what we're talking about to any relationship dynamic. And I think one of the ways that this comes up for a lot of us, so we've talked a bit about being a receptive, welcoming, honoring steward, right? For the money that wants to come home to you. And what goes on when you spend said money, right? Like how does that feel? And I want to read another quote because I think this is also an important topic. And I actually talked to my daughters about this because interestingly, and I think this is probably not uncommon, but they are like very frugal. Okay. So they both have sort of like entrepreneurial designs. In fact, my eldest has already had a natural makeup company called Experience Beauty and, was working for $25 an hour when she was like 12. This was my unschooling moment before I lost them to, boyfriends and socialization in the school system. But regardless, they have almost like it's almost like they're worried about my spending my money in ways that I am not consciously anyway. Right. And so I would say to them, listen, like I spend money with joy, right? So it's the enjoyment principle, right? Like I enjoy spending it. If I choose to spend it, it's going to always be like a fuck yes. And I recommend, this practice. And so, so you write here, you said, ultimately, whether handed to an oil company to fill up an SUV, a tobacco company to feed an addiction, or to a government agency to pay for taxes, most money exchanges fall under the victim's whimper of, I had no choice. A helpless stance void of conscious stewardship that leaves the departing bundle of money feeling uncared for and untrusting in your leadership. So, when it comes to the actual experience of paying, it sounds like you've come to a similar place where the handoff, right, can be one of willful choice. I mean, that's all, right? And then we can dress it up with like pleasure and enjoyment and other things. But to resolve the victim posture, that's all that's required. Is like I am choosing. I mean, especially when it comes to taxes, I am choosing to participate in this way. Like, is it ever true that you have no choice? But to hand it over. So yeah, I wonder if you could speak to sort of like how you feel it would serve us to consider a reframe around actually spending.
Yeah, well, it's my view that the victim posture pretty much never yields any positive benefit. Like I just can't think of any circumstance where a chronic victim posture, right? Like this doesn't mean denying, right, uneasiness, right, and bypassing through feelings of like, gosh, this doesn't feel good, right? But being in chronic victimhood, especially around where you circulate money, it's like, if you're sad and depressed and victimy when recirculating money, like money doesn't want to pass through that, right? That is not, you are not being a channel that money wants to be received and rechanneled through. It's really as simple as that. So I think like one really elegant and simple practice that I personally enjoy. And you don't need to exaggerate it. You don't need to give yourself Stockholm syndrome with the oil company, right? Or the government. Like you don't, yes, Mr. Like you don't have to go there, right? And right, if you could simply thank the money flowing through you, right, for what it has provided, acknowledge that a choice has been made, and simply bless it, right? So it's a really simple blessing. And, there's been so much research done around water blessing. To me, it's a very similar concept,
Yes.
right?
Yeah.
To me, money is of the water element. It's impressionable like water. You can go into the studies of, I think it was Dr. Emoto, right? Like water, going through, simple statements, right? I love you, I hate you, certain mantras, certain blessings, and just blessing that departing flow, right? Just blessing it, right? Like you don't need to condone the company that it's being sent to. You don't need to agree with all their actions. Just bless the money because it has nothing to do with that company, right? Like it has nothing to do with it. And it announces to that flow, right, that it is safe to flow into your presence, right? That you are going to love it, you're going to honor it, you are going to consciously choose where to recirculate it. And this is where things may get more in the esoteric realm. It's a belief I choose to have because it feels good to have it. But I think there were also water studies done around like one drop of holy water, right? And we could go into all sorts of dynamics around holy water and the church, and let's not go there. But one drop of holy water, like dropped in 70 gallons of quote unquote normal water, will change the signature, the vibration and the quality of 70 gallons from one drop, right? So it's my belief, and I choose to embrace this, that even kind of re-channeling like a bundle of, call it $10,000 of blessed money, right? And dropping that into the larger accounts of a company, right, or a being or an entity that you would judge to be less than conscious can have an overall effect on the totality of those accounts, right? And have kind of an emanation of a higher vibrancy and a higher frequency. And that is a form of repair work I get excited about. It's a form of activism I feel like I can get behind because that's audacious, right? It's like channeling, $20,000 to the government in taxes, right? And instead of feeling victimized, somehow taking a stance of feeling empowered and being responsible for the repair work of money, and maybe even these accounts within these government agencies get greater exposure of light frequencies. To me, that's something I enjoy participating in.
So since you brought up the topic of activism, I'd love to get your 2 cents on something that I have observed, which is that there is a fragmentation between the concept of service, philanthropy, bettering the world, doing good for others, and prosperity, which is the experience of wealth garnered for your expression, right? Let's say. And this fragmentation is such that in the truther world, in the holistic wellness world, in the activism world, there is a strong effort to never be perceived as doing it for the so-called money, and to make sure that you're doing it for the right reasons. And if prosperity and service seem to overlap, there is often an attraction of condemnation, criticism, accusations around profiteering. And this split wants to be harmonized.
Right. Yeah. I think, or what I perceive is that financial victimhood still runs rampant, right? If I give money to you, you are taking it from me and bringing me one step closer to destitution and poverty and death, right? Like that's really the core of financial victimhood, is this person is bringing me closer to death, right? And that is a story, right, that perhaps even has some basis in truthful generational experience, right? When you think of war, when you think of famine, when you think of being taxed to death, right? And even the language we use, there's some validity to that. There's certainly some current running generationally that has given rise to the accuracy of that story. And that story has run its course, right? Like, we have suffered enough for these stories, right? We don't need to honor those who have fallen to these stories by perpetuating them. And I think that this is one of the keys to our inner healing, is that we don't dishonor our ancestors, right? And those who have suffered by changing the story, right? We don't invalidate their suffering by choosing not to suffer, right? There's no solidarity in continuing to perpetuate that. And in my view, when so much suffering energy, right, has been leaked, right, has been embedded, right, in these stories become living architectures, right, that seek to run its course, right? Stories don't like being interrupted, right? I've noticed this in myself, even when I've noticed this story doesn't really serve. A story has momentum, right? It wants to pull you through it, even if you're trying to disrupt it and say, I'm not sure I want to live this story, right? And I'll give you a personal example. Maybe about a year ago, I confronted the story of the bled dry father and provider, right? The one who suffers to provide for their family and no one appreciates him, and you're bled dry and you're the straw dog, right? You're kind of left for dead after that. And I did a lot of work with this in my men's group and workshops, right, that I ran, this wounding pattern, right, of the bled dry father and provider. There's a meme that went viral on Father's Day. It had 1 million shares, and it was father, the one who gives his shoes to his son, and there's just this father who's left for dead, right? And to remaining victim fragments within, that's a really seductive story to hook into, right? And once you're hooked into a story, it's kind of like watching a movie. You don't want to turn it off halfway through. You're I want to run this through to its conclusion. Even if I don't want the outcome of the story kind of pulls you through it. So story disruption is such a valuable practice. And there are many ways to do it, shamanically, right, or energetically. I just tune into kind of visualizing the story, right, and the timeline of it, and literally creating disruptive vibrations within it, vibrated loose so that it loses that coherence. That's a whole other subject. But coming across the power of story and its desire to be run towards its conclusion has been really revealing. And I can't remember the initial question now.
No, that's perfect. And
Yeah.
obviously, to anyone listening, this is, my bread and butter and passion is the nature of this story shedding. And I think collectively we have decided that change, right? To change your story, change your identity, change your value system, even change your priorities, means that you were wrong before. And if we are in our victim consciousness forever endeavoring to be right, then to be wrong is too costly. And so once you can even make that shift where you say, you resolve the chronological snobbery, right? You resolve this sense of superiority that you might have over your past self, right? So if I look back at my med prescribing self eating McDonald's, if I feel fundamentally superior to her, it seems natural, right? Because isn't this some sort of spiritual meritocracy, right? Aren't I doing better and better and better? Perhaps through one lens, but it's a dangerous game to play, because that means that the next time I want to change, which if you're me, that's I don't know, next Wednesday, then it still has that huge price tag of that means I was wrong before and maybe even bad before. So now I have to keep trying to be so right about who I am, in the present, to negate the bad and wrong versions of me before. And it's a perilous path to shed these stories versus remaining, in the comfy, cozy womb of our, sort of minimally met needs, because these stories, you would agree, I'm sure, they meet our needs, right? It serves us to stay stuck.
Yeah, they perpetuate and animate certain characters, right, that we still on some level desire to play out, right, that we desire to see animated and try on and be like, where does this go, right? And there's a sense of being enamored right around so many stories and outcomes that don't serve because we've romanticized so many negative conclusions and outcomes. Call that through programming, through conditioning, through observing parents run that script, and they're alluring, right? It's like this assumption, right, that we would never desire a negative or punishing circumstance or outcome, in my experience, is untrue. There are certainly parts that feel like they want to have that experience, that they need to have that experience, and they remain loyal to that experience. Loyalty, right? That's a whole other topic, right? The shadow side of loyalty, and how we can feel like we're betraying these old past versions by changing course. So there's a lot of really good stuff there. For me, like ultimately, and this is where I love solo shadow work, right? This book was really designed for someone to like go at it alone, right? Because I think like to generate that sense of fierce grace and total unyielding compassion yourself as you go through it is a lot easier than doing so relationally, right? And to me, this is like a sadness I've just sought to repair so much in my work in doing couples work, right? Is where like it is still in so many couples and relationships unsafe to acknowledge, right? I was enacting out this pattern, right? To take ownership of that doesn't really come at a, this over outpouring of gratitude for the acknowledgement. It kind of ignites the hurt that was suppressed, right? And you kind of get crucified for your shadow. And it's kind of this unending vicious cycle where like, where do you actually create greater connection through that? So yeah, in my view, shadow work requires that field of warmth, right? This capacity to see all and feel all and witness all in a space that hasn't been hijacked by your own suppressor or inner critic, right? And the inner critic is really good at masquerading as like the one doing shadow work, right? Where it's like, I hate all this shit. We're going to get to the other side of it and be a better person, right? And it's just like
utilitarian.
Right,
Yeah,
totally. So yeah, I love the idea of creating truly safe spaces to do like the deep, gnarly shadow work, right? And really giving it that liberating space. Because otherwise, like that really dark, damaging stuff that you just really wouldn't admit, which is the shadow, right? The stuff that like isn't the safe, I'll give this, right? This sounds good enough to offer this as my shadow. And you really get like deep down into it, there are stuff that you just don't even want to say out loud. Because like, I cannot in a million years associate this or tie this to my character. And yeah, I think creating those spaces, right? First internally, right? In your own internal shadow work is so vital.
totally. Reminds me of, work I do on acknowledging like shameful wants that I have around money. Like one of mine is that you can't want what you want, right? And so I want to have like full staff, right? Like driver, chef, like immaculate home, like literally specialized men doing everything there is to do around the property. So, and there were many years that I was aware that I had that desire and would never have admitted that like out loud. What would that mean about me? What kind of a bougie bitch wants that? And to come into like, even with yourself in your journal in the privacy of your home, some sort of awareness without even an efforting towards, putting some sort of bow on it, just like, oh, that's there. Interesting. Like what other shameful desires are there related to, money, wealth, or, even just having and holding, which is something, you agree, we grow into, if we actually could hold all the things that we want, we would have them perhaps. So I have a quick question before we go, and you didn't write about this per se in the book, but I know that you have worked in the space of polarity and men's work, and you were referencing couples work. I wonder, what you think about the role that money is playing in the modern, marriage,
Mm,
and man-woman dynamics as far as providership and the way that so many women have connected to entrepreneurship or self-expression in this, you know, um, in this space of really recognizing the fulfillment
mhm,
of, I've referenced this Japanese concept. Maybe you've heard of ikigai.
mm.
Did
Yep,
you did you put that in the book? I feel like now maybe you even wrote that. Anyway, whatever, or you've
yep.
heard of it. So it's just this idea that like our gifts and talents, what it is that we love to do, service to the collective, and prosperity all
Mhm,
can harmonize and synergize to confer a sense of fulfillment. When we wake up in the morning, we
mm,
actually want to be alive, right?
mhm,
And the prosperity piece, it's just a part of the fulfillment equation. It just
mhm,
is, right? So, as women, I think many of us are recognizing that when we are self expressing, when we are in our creative moments, it can feel amazing to create a business out of that, right?
mhm,
So, in the modern, marital home, I know there are all sorts of dynamics and some sort of counter revolution against the egalitarian,
mhm.
approach to, 50-50 partnership. And
Sure.
I know, Data's work and what he has to say about what that does to polarity, to invest in that kind of, you
Mhm,
know, buddy type. We're both bringing both to the table energy. But I wonder, just sort of broadly what you're seeing as being some of the challenges and some of the ways that we can frame relationship to money, because I've never really thought about this blood dry father, this concept of the martyr, right? The martyr
mhm.
father. I
Right.
think of that so much in the maternal role. So that
Mhm,
victim consciousness is of course alive and well in both archetypes. But yeah, so how do you think we might be advised to like navigate this dynamically?
mm. Yeah, I'm gonna like bring it to a really simple principle, right? That I've been trying on myself, right, in my own partnership. And it's that of devotion, right? Like truly hearing and feeling like how my partner wishes to experience her life in her body, right? And how devotional can I get in being of service to that? How much can I truly, like, wholeheartedly desire that for her, right? And it's such a simple question. And once you ask it, so much shit comes up, right, around withholding and around punishment in particular, right? And these are the themes that, to me, um, most distort healthy polarity, right? Like when you truly don't want your partner, right, to live this dream life for herself or for himself, you're going to find ways to sabotage it. You're going to find ways to create these counter intentions between what you say you're doing and what you actually want to receive, right? So to me, like, I mean, the concept of 50-50, I'll flat out say it is absurd, right? It's a superimposed construct. Like, why are we even going there? Right? It's just like, I want to be in a
Thank
place
you,
of,
feminism. Okay.
I want to be in a place of devotional gifting, right? As a man, as a provider, as someone who's even wearing that energetic clothing, right? Even if I don't fully invest myself in the archetype as a provider, factually, right, to deny that I'm wearing that or playing within that would be false. And while I'm in it, I want to absolutely take the biggest fucking stand for how my partner wants to live her life. Right. And I want to be an all in fuck yes to witnessing her in that and celebrating her in that. And I want to feel, right, in return, right, there is a reciprocal element. I want to feel an element of holy fucking reverence around that. Look at what you're capable of, capacity, right? I love to be seen in that. So having devotional elements of like being devoted to her feminine expression while receiving her devotion for my capacity, my desire to gift, to me creates this like flow of nourishment that just keeps cycling back and forth, and nothing and no one feels depleted. Nothing feels impossible. That to me creates this field of constant fuck yeah cycling through the system. Um, so devotion, love, and devotion, right? And however that gets played with and expressed, And it can happen in a myriad of forms, right, and ways. But ultimately, my self check is how much do I really want her to experience this cleanly, right? So like one simple statement is like, if we were kind of like using your experience here, right, is like, if I said out loud, I want Kelly to receive all the gifts of 20 men serving her different needs in all these different ways, right? Like,
Sounds way
how,
kinkier than it was intended. Okay.
how much of a fuck yeah am I in declaring that desire for you to have that, right? And where am I unclean or insincere and inauthentic, right? To me, inauthenticity creates this like flatlining hum, right, in the relational field. And ultimately, devotional quality, right? How much do you truly want that experience for your partner?
Yeah, it really smokes out a lot of the competitive dynamics that otherwise are at play when polarity roles are incompletely adhered to, if you will. So that's super helpful. I love that. So I want to close on some codes that I thought were really cool and just sort of template, I guess, what your perspective is on the potential that we have to heal this relationship, to integrate this energy, to welcome it into our sphere, even with its complexities, right? And to also disassociate it from the objects of projection that we have otherwise like gotten snarled into the field of money, right? So, okay, so you call them foundational conscious money codes, and there's 3 here that I really like. So, number 1 is I am in loving awe and celebration that my relationship with money is now fully healed, loving, and prosperous. 2, I am in ecstatic euphoria that my relationship, I love that my relationship with money is now fully healed, loving, and prosperous. 3, I am in boundless appreciation and infinite gratitude that my relationship with money is now fully healed, loving, and prosperous. So if that's not a foundation for where you can go, if you choose to abdicate, this your participation in this system entirely, and you want to, go off grid and barter and, live your happy life, it still seems like coming to this neutrality. I call it, neutralizing rejection of the erotic caress of the enemy, right? Like we get into these like erotic dynamics with that, which we reject, right? So if you can come to this neutrality, then you're liberated to make choices, like actual choices, instead of living your life in this victim field of I have to do this, I have to do that, I can't do this, and I am otherwise like, really restricted into this zone of existence that maybe even I was born into. And so that's where I belong, as we were saying. So I wonder if you could just leave us on this note, around why you think it matters, for us to do this work. Do you think that this is an imperative we all are facing? Should we all do this work? If we're sort of making ends meet, is it still work we have to do? Or is it just if we have our designs on, levels of wealth that don't seem easily attainable that we should do this work? Or is it if we're in a kink of struggle, we should do this work? I just sort of feel like, from my perspective, everyone could benefit because it's relational work and you have a relationship with every single thing and system around you. So best to get right with it. So what do you think? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you nailed it, right? Like if we're already in relationship with it, if we're already in the work, right, just participating consciously and effectively within it makes sense, right? Like to me, to not engage consciously in the work has a form of denial of being in that relationship. And I've never seen a relationship become more whole and fruitful and, love driven and filled with eros and all these amazing qualities while denying that you're in a relationship. It just doesn't happen, right? So I feel like bringing that level of awareness and doing that work that you're already doing, and cleaning up that field, regardless of kind of where you are on the quote unquote like wealth scale, right? To me, this work is just as valid if you are quote unquote stuck in struggle, right? Or attained a massive windfall, right? And we could go into the whole set of dynamics around, lottery winners and superstar athletes who attain massive wealth and self-destruct around it. That's perhaps a future conversation. But yeah, this work is for anyone who is relating with money, which in most cases is everyone, right? So yeah, that's really my final note on that.
Amen. Amazing. So where can folks find you, work with you, learn more from your downloads?
So the running joke is like, as I create more pen names for my different books, right, I just have like a scattering, right, of stuff online. So my personal page, Facebook, Ryan Schwartz, you'll find me there. Money Shaman on Instagram, set up Hendrix Black on Instagram for the men's work relational stuff. One day, maybe I'll consolidate all these names. And
you just did a good link in bio.
Right. Right. Right now, it's just a running joke. The amount of domain names I've got to renew every year is just ridiculous.
Just try it on different identities. It's good for plasticity.
I received this name while I was like running around the gym. I'm like, really? I got to call myself that? Like, are you sure? Like, I did like three checks. I'm like, that's what I'm going to call myself. So there we go.
Trusting those impulses. I love that. It's an important practice. Well, thank you for this. I feel very connected to, the journey that you are on. And I think it is in the zeitgeist. We are in the midst of a grand opportunity to rebrand and reframe and recognize how we were playing into, victim consciousness in ways that we were potentially not aware. And I just so love, sharing this language and perspective with you. So thank you, Ryan.
Yeah, likewise. It's so enriching. Thank you for creating the space to have this conversation, and hope it's been helpful to those tuning in.
Absolutely.